Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Due Diligence, the Value of Forensic Investigation and the Protection of Financial and Business Investors. During this webinar, our presenter will cover the following: the problem with databases, how to overcome their inadequacies, due diligence is a criminal investigation, understanding data in context, how to assess data psychologically for improved accuracy. Today's webinar will feature criminal analyst Dale Yeager. Dale began his education as a criminal analyst in 1988. He has extensive training in criminal psychology, forensic psychology, sex crimes investigations, and crime scene forensic/procedures. He also has experience with domestic terrorism analysis. Dale has an advanced training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center from 2005 to 2008. As a criminal analyst, Dale has consulted on numerous criminal cases, including the first murder investigation of John Benet Ramsey. Dale's research has been published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin and Profiling Violent Crimes by Dr. Ronald Holmes. He is a frequent expert with media outlets, including a featured episode of The Forensic Files. Dale has lectured at many higher education institutions throughout the United States, such as, but not limited to, Drexel and Howard universities. He is an instructor for the Newman University Criminal Justice Program. In 2002, Dale was given a presidential appointment to the U.S. Selective Service System, and in 2004, he became a member of the FBI's InfraGard program. If you have a question that pertains to the presentation, we do ask that you use the Q&A or chat features, which are found on the right-hand side of the screen. I've highlighted them with my red pointer. Dale will do his best to answer your questions during the presentation. Tomorrow morning, I will send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this webinar. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the webinar is over. I will now turn it over to our distinguished guest, Dale Yeager. Dale, it is all yours.
Thank you, Matt. Today, what I'd like to do is do a mini seminar for those of you who are watching the webinar and listening to the webinar to basically give you a different understanding of due diligence. After Bernie Madoff occurred, we always say post-Bernie and pre-Bernie. After Bernie Madoff occurred, people took a new interest in due diligence. The question was, why did that happen? Why have there been over 180 so far Ponzi schemes uncovered by state and federal regulators? And I want to talk today about whether you're an attorney or whether you're a CPA. I want to talk about specifically this issue of due diligence, what it is and what it isn't, and how to improve it dramatically to protect your clients. So, did I do this right? I always screw this up, Matt. Here it is. Okay. Sorry about that. Technical issues on my part. Peter Drucker, the famous management guru, who I was a student of for 15 years, made this statement, which I find fantastic, but I think is misunderstood. Executives cannot use business ethics as a defense for acts that would be condemned if committed by anyone else. One of the problems is that when you're doing due diligence, when you're investigating whether someone should buy a company, invest money with a stockbroker or a financial person, one of the things you have to ask first is, what are their personal ethics? And we're going to talk about this later on, that people's personal ethics, how they act in normal life, reflects on how they act in their business life. And Dr. Drucker talked extensively in his career about this issue of ethics and business management. We'll talk about that more as we go through this. But again, as Dr. Drucker said, executives cannot use business ethics as a defense for acts that would be condemned if committed by anybody else. How you act in your personal life is how you will act in your business life. I've done this 20 years, and the correlation is very clear. What is due diligence? Well, the term really comes about because of the Securities Act of 1933. And in the Securities Act, and since that time, if you're an attorney, if you are a CPA, you probably have learned what's called the prudence principle. The prudence principle is very simply defined as a standard of care requiring discretion and caution, close attention that enables somebody to avoid the risks involved in a task or procedure. And so again, it's taking a standard of care and caution to a very high level. And it's a legal precedence that was set a long time ago, actually, the standard of care concept in law. But in the Securities Act of 1933, this was taken to a whole new level. What I find is that many people are not meeting that standard of care or discretion or caution when doing due diligence. And this is one of the primary reasons why we continue to have Ponzi schemes and investor fraud and people buying businesses that end up being a nightmare for them. Let's start first with problem number one, the problem with databases. Many people use LexisNexis. Many people use various types of databases. Our process, our proprietary process that we use, only uses databases in 30% of our process. So only 30% of it uses databases, and we use databases as a starting point and nothing more. One of the things we know is that databases are horribly inaccurate. For example, I train law enforcement for the HIDA, the White House HIDA program. One of the things I tell them, and one of the things that they all know, is that the NCIC check, the National Criminal Records check, is inaccurate. About 20% of the data that you're looking for isn't going to be there, and some of the data is inaccurate. And this is the first premise when you're using any type of database, is know that there's going to be an incredible amount of inaccuracy and things that are not there. And so if you're going to depend on databases to do your due diligence, you're in trouble right away, because databases are horribly inaccurate. You've got to verify with two sources every piece of data that's critical once you pull it from a database. So let's start. They grab information about people and companies in bulk without human editors to put it in context. Example, divorce. A database cannot sector data pre-divorce and post-divorce. It also cannot do this key task if the person in question lived with a domestic partner. And so, again, it's grabbing data, and even LexisNexis, which is a very good database, still has a lot of problems. You cannot just depend on that. And just FYI, private investigators depend incredibly, most of their work is done using databases. They put a lot of attention on database searches. And again, this is a problem. Credit histories come from financial and banking data. They are the most accurate records in a society, and yet correcting wrong information in credit histories is a daily occurrence. It's an industry. Getting your credit history fixed, sending in the letters, sending in the information to get that information corrected is a regular business in the United States and around the world. And if credit histories, which are using financial and banking data, which are about as accurate as it gets in our society, if they're inaccurate, how much more are these databases? And so again, databases have problems, and you have to have a system to verify it. Let's talk about the Bishop issue. I want all of you who are watching and listening to this webinar to think about this. I want you to pretend for a moment that you are the human resources person at the University of Alabama. Now, many of you know that back in February 12th, neuroscience professor Amy Bishop opened fire and killed and named several people, killed 3 people, and named several of her coworkers, deans, professors, and the like. She was in a meeting at the time. They were refusing to give her tenure, and so she pulled out a pistol and decided to kill everyone that day. And I want you to picture for a moment that you're the human resources person, and she has come to the university, and you're going to consider hiring her. So let's ask a question. What could you have found just on the Internet before the shooting? So that means that all the data I'm showing you now was on the Internet in 2009 and earlier. So a simple search in Google could have brought you to this information. Number one, her accidental shooting of her 18-year-old brother in 1986 when she was a 21-year-old college student. By the way, she reloaded 3 times. I have a problem as a forensics expert calling that an accidental shooting, but we'll continue. During that accidental shooting, she ran with the firearm to a local car dealership. She pointed a loaded firearm at Tom Pettigrew and Jeff Doyle and told them that if they didn't give her a car, she was going to blow their effing brains out. Bishop pointed the gun also at police the same day. The 1994 investigation of Bishop and her husband regarding a mail bomb plot against a doctor at Harvard. Her husband was part of that investigation, which is still open-ended. The 2002 assault charge after punching a woman in the head at an International House of Pancakes in Peabody, Massachusetts, where, while she was punching her, screamed, "Don't you know who I am? Don't you know who I am?" So after seeing this information, which you could have gotten off of Google, would you have hired her? Well, I hope the answer is absolutely not, but yet she was hired. And then everyone was shocked and surprised that she did what she did. She had shown a pattern of behavior. She had shown a violent pathology, and it didn't require you to have a forensics degree to understand that this was someone you didn't want at your university. Google is your friend. Regular people use Google. Professionals use Google Advanced Search. If you go to Google, there's a very tiny little button called Google Advanced. That's where you start. Period. End of story. When you go in there, you put in the name of the person you're looking for, the business name, whoever you're trying to research, and hit it and see what it brings up. Go at least 10 pages in. This is going to be hard work, but this is where we start, Google Advanced. It's amazing what you can find. Also, there is a cool little feature that Google allows you to do in Google Advanced, where you can actually put the name of someone in and then put a site name. And, for example, Dale Yeager's site, www.linkedin.com, and that will actually allow you to search social networking pages for that specific person in more depth than you can do just through just a name search. So you can actually tie a site, a specific site, to a name of a business or a name of a person. This is going to give you a lot of good information. This is going to tell you a lot about what's going on with that person. It gets you started, and the good news is it's free of charge. You can't beat free. Now there are several other websites, actually 8 total websites that we use and we teach in our due diligence class for CLE credit that we teach in our class. There's more to it than Google Advanced, but at least today I want to leave that with you, that is a valuable tool that you should be using. Treating due diligence as a criminal investigation. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because it may bother some of you, and I don't mean to upset you, but think clearly about this. If you're doing due diligence, you should not start with the premise that everybody is not guilty. The way we start a due diligence investigation is I sit down with my investigative team, who are military-level criminal investigators, and I say, these people who own this business are guilty of a crime. Now let's go prove it. Due diligence has to start as a criminal investigation. And either you're going to prove that they have committed crimes, that they are unethical, or you are not. Sadly, most of the time we do find the dirt. And the thing is that you've got to start with that premise. We're not a court of law. What we have to do is we have to protect our clients, and we have to dig, and we have to find out what's going on. Just like a forensic accountant does not believe the numbers in front of him or her, just like you as an attorney do not believe in any way, shape, or form that what's in front of you is the truth. The same thing goes for investigators. And this is a key element of quality forensic investigation, is starting it as a criminal investigation. I love this poster that is in every Boeing plant. I actually have a copy of it that's framed on the wall of my office. Between right and wrong is the troublesome gray. The problem is that there are an awful lot of people in our society who believe that life is about gray. Now, I'm not here to discuss philosophy, but I will tell you that within the realm of law and finance, there can be no gray. You're either good at what you do or you stink at what you do. There can be no gray. Because once you go down that path of, well, that's a gray area, and I could go either way on it. Once you start down that path, that's a slippery slope. And every person that you ever see who has committed a Ponzi scheme, who has been involved in a Ponzi scheme, or investor fraud, or who has lied about a business that they've sold, they started with little acts of gray, what we call little acts of gray. And then it got easier the next time and the next time. Again, everybody has secrets. Do you know all the secrets that would hurt your client? You have to find out what people's secrets are. A person's personal life explains his or her business life. Plain and simple. Let's talk about Bernie Madoff. What could you have found out about Bernie Madoff before his arrest for investor fraud? Well, let's take a look. This was on the Internet, by the way. We found this on the Internet. Okay, his father, Ralph, was a mysterious person. He worked as a plumber, but listed his occupation as credit on his marriage license. He later became a stockbroker. In fact, he went from being a plumber to a stockbroker in 7 months. I love America. Along with 3 people, he owed a tax debt of $13,245.28, which is about $100,000 in today's dollars. That caused the IRS to place a lien on the Madoff home. Taxes were assessed in '56, but the lien was not paid off until '65 after the house was sold, suggesting that Ralph was either fighting the tax bill or unable to pay it. We're not really sure, but it did come up in an Internet search of old records. Now, at the same time there's a tax lien on the house, and Bernie's a child living in the home, his mother Sylvia had a run-in with the government. In August of '63, the SEC announced it was instituting proceedings to determine whether 48 broker-dealers, including his mother, doing business as Gibraltar Securities, had failed to file reports of their financial condition, and if so, whether their registration should be revoked. In January of '64, the SEC dismissed the administrative proceedings against a number of the firms, including his mother's, in what appears to be a deal. No penalties if you promise to stay out of business is basically what they told them. So here the IRS was investigating and had placed the lien for taxes that were owed. And then also at the same time, his mother was running a stock brokerage out of their home in Long Island. The address for the securities firm was the Madoff home. You could have found this on the Internet. Go Google. Now, after graduating from high school, he attended the University of Alabama for 1 year. Let me tell you something. I work in criminal cases, primarily on sex crime cases and on juvenile crime, crimes committed by juveniles. The one thing I know about juveniles is if there is chaos in the home, they will, when they leave, either to get a job or to go to college, they will go as far away as the East is from the West. And I would say that the University of Alabama is as far away from Long Island as you can get going north and south. And I think that why he went there, from what I can tell from our investigation, was because he wanted to get away from his parents. There's a lot of chaos in the home, as you can see. He transferred to and graduated from Hofstra in 1960 with a degree in political science. What's interesting is people with poli-sci degrees either go into the law, become attorneys, or go into politics. That's an interesting correlation that I've seen. After Hofstra, he attended Brooklyn Law School but dropped out. He had a phobia. Which I'm very familiar with, where he was obsessed with order and cleanliness. One thing that we know that is not argued anymore in forensics is that children who have had trauma, either emotional or psychological or physical trauma, tend to be obsessed with order and cleanliness. This is a natural response. Obsessed with things being neat and orderly. For example, in his office, every piece of furniture, equipment, and decoration was black or gray. That extended even to the push pins in the employees' cubicles. Everything needed to be symmetrical and in straight lines. When Madoff was in the office, all window blinds had to be aligned at the same height, and all computer screens had to be arrayed at the same angle and position. It was actually very common for him to get out of the elevator and straighten out the rugs. He used prostitutes routinely, and by the way, we found online various employees talking about this in chat rooms pre his arrest. Sexually harassed his secretary, Eleanor Squillari, and routinely dropped his trousers in the office, startling female employees. In fact, in forensic terms, he was a sexual sociopath. And again, this behavior was on the Internet. And again, I know there are other reasons why people got sucked into the Bernie Madoff cult, I'll call it. But again, a simple search of the Internet would have told you this is probably not a guy that I should be putting my money in. But here's the secret that very few people knew about. In the 1960s, Madoff, as a young man, lost $85,000 to one of the most famous Ponzi schemers in American judicial history, which is Jack Dick. So Madoff was actually a victim of a Ponzi scheme. As late as 2007, Madoff claimed to have created NASDAQ. His claims regarding his business history have been shown to be embellished. In fact, the people who actually started NASDAQ have gone on business television shows and in magazines saying, he's got to stop saying this. You know, he was not involved at all. One of the things when you're doing due diligence is to get a resume for the person or their bio and check it out. Do an assessment of the bio, because that's going to tell you a lot about whether they're lying or not. If you lie about one thing, you'll lie about everything. And here Bernie was lying for years, and nobody was catching it because they weren't looking for it, because they were taking carefree attitude about their due diligence. A lot of these people who got scammed were not protected by the people who should have protected them, in my opinion. Understanding data in context, how to assess data psychologically for improved accuracy. Personality types of aggressive and violent people. This is the forensic definition of a sociopath, a violent instigator or violent leader. Now let me explain. Charles Manson is a violent leader, or a violent instigator. The guy who, like Bernie Madoff, is more of a violent leader type. You say, well, Bernie wasn't violent. Violence is a relative term, because in forensics world, you can incite other people to criminal behavior. So it really should say criminal instigator or criminal leader. You can instigate other people to criminal behavior and not actually do the thing yourself. But let's look at what the pathology is: superficial or pretentious, egocentric or self-absorbed. We used to call pretentious Kathy Lee Gifford syndrome, but nobody knows who she is anymore. The bottom line is people who are superficial or phony. That is part of a sociopathic personality disorder. And by the way, sociopaths and psychopaths are not mentally ill. It's a personality disorder. It's something that is learned, is a reaction to trauma. Manipulative or controlling of others, impulsive, shallow emotionally. They see the world with a paranoid's eye. They see threats where none exist. They see their anger and aggressiveness as justified. Bernie was a fanatic. As soon as anything would be out of the ordinary, he would start questioning people. If the SEC showed up, even to have lunch with someone, he would freak out. He was very paranoid. People who are paranoid all the time generally have something to hide. They have high self-esteem. Research shows that sociopaths demonstrate little anxiety and insecurity. This is something that probably shocks a lot of people. When I interview over the years sociopaths, they're very sure of themselves. They're very confident of themselves. Are they delusional? Sometimes, but they have a great deal of self-esteem. Sexual sociopath, overly friendly and helpful in minor tasks, asks a lot of questions and is prying, stands uncomfortably close, doesn't respect your privacy or property, makes a comment about personal issues, looks at you in a luring way. I think most people who look at this, many women who look at this say, well, I know a lot of guys like that. Well, be careful. This is a problem. Again, your personal behavior reflects on your business behavior. The psychopath, the violent loner, or retaliatory victim, and we call them retaliatory victims because they've been victims at some point, and they retaliate. The bullied becomes the bully. The bullied becomes the bully. Basically was what a psychopath is. Socially isolated, tends to socialize with similar loners in very small groups, which is not normal for a human being to do. Usually but not always have distinctive clothing or unique interests that set them apart from other groups. Males have very poor relationships or volatile relationships with females. Females will be aggressive and exhibit leadership qualities in small groups of males. They're very complicated. Psychopaths are very complicated, and they do a lot of financial crime. This is your hacker. This is the kind of guy or the girl who hacks into a system at a company. Right here. Right here is a great example of that. And by the way, let me say something to you if you represent companies. We find that hacking is not the primary reason why companies have things stolen or financial information taken or money taken. We find that most of the time, we find that what they do is they'll take an intern from a college. Someone who wants information will tell the intern, if you get me this information, I'll give you $10,000. It's amazing what people can be bought for. And so what happens is the intern goes into the company, walks around, no one pays attention to them, and they grab what they need. And we've seen companies just within a 20-mile radius of where I'm sitting right now in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, who have been destroyed by interns who were paid to steal information. I would end by asking this: how can we improve our due diligence process? That's your question of the day. And as professionals, you shouldn't be scared of asking yourself difficult questions. How can we improve our due diligence process? If you say it's perfect, I don't know what to tell you then. I don't think due diligence processes that I've seen are perfect. I see them as needing improvement, but you're the only person that can answer this question accurately. Next, how do any improvements to this process affect our hiring and management practices? If you're poor at due diligence, I guarantee, from what I've seen, that you have problems in your hiring and management practices in your firm or in your company. If you can't do proper due diligence, that means you're not doing it within your own organization. So everything affects everything else. It's all intertwined, interconnected. All right, Matt, I'll just take questions now if there are any questions.
Sure. Yeah, we do have a couple questions here in the queue. This one comes from Jim, who asks, what steps do you propose or would you propose following for responsible due diligence? Could you list a couple steps that you think would be under the category of responsible due diligence?
All right. Well, it has three parts. One is any financials should be reviewed by a forensic accountant. And there are a lot of accountants out there who view themselves as forensic accountants, but you really need to limit that to people who have had the experience, who have had the proper training. Chartered accountants, you all probably know what a chartered accountant is. And here in the United States, we have CPAs. Most countries overseas use chartered accountants. We find that chartered accountants, that's who we use, make the best forensic accountants because they have better quality training. They have better understanding of international currency and different types of accounting systems. So first, you need to find someone qualified to look at the money, to look at the financials from a forensic perspective. Second, you do your job, which is that of an attorney, to do the assessment, the due diligence from a legal perspective. Thirdly, what's left? If you've covered the financial and you've covered the legal, what's left? Well, what's left is that you're going to have to look into the lives of the board, of the executives of that company, into that financial planner's life, into that stock brokerage. Who's going to do that? You're going to have someone that can look into their lives and do an assessment about the ethics of those people, because really the company or the place that the money is going to be invested in is only as good as the people. So how are you going to investigate the people? And I would really strongly encourage you to take a second look at private investigators. I don't use private investigators, and I don't begrudge someone making a living, but I have yet to find a PI who has the resources that a military criminal investigator does, and that's who I use. And for a financial assessment, I use former CID agents from the IRS, Criminal Investigation Division. They scare me and they work for me. They're very good at what they do. So choose who's going to look at these people's lives very, very carefully. And then what did you miss in the legal assessment and the financial assessment? Find someone who can put the icing on the cake. So it's financial, legal, and then the people, looking at the people and looking at their lives. Those are the three components. Hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, Dale, we have another question here that pertains to the first bullet point that you talked about today, which was the problem with databases. Mm-hmm. And the question asks, databases tend to rule our life. It seems like everything is driven by a database. Even Google is one big database. How would you overcome their inadequacies? And you referenced using Google Advanced Search, but what other tools, in addition to kind of high-end query systems, would you use to do proper due diligence?
Well, again, what I was saying in the beginning, I'm sorry I didn't make it clear, is that the databases have to be a minor part of your due diligence investigation. You're going to have to do some things the old-fashioned way. For example, when we're looking at data that comes to us through our databases, which are very high-end law enforcement type databases, we still don't believe what we see, and we have to get on the phone, we have to send someone out, and we have to verify that information. It's amazing what you learn when you're verifying information found in a database, because if it's wrong, it will lead you to something else. It'll provide a lead, and you end up finding things that are pretty extraordinary. And will protect your client. In some cases, because we all have federal security clearances, we find crimes that have been committed and we have to report them to the FBI or to the Treasury Department. It's amazing what you find when you dig. So they're really the only other option once you've done your basic searches on good quality databases is to do it the old-fashioned way and start looking through the documents. Getting the right documents is key. And one of the things that we do is put a list together for our clients of what the documents should be given by that stock brokerage, by that financial advisor, by the company. The documents that you get that we can assess or you can assess yourself are critical to really digging in and getting proper due diligence done. It's the questions you ask, the answers you get, and the documents, besides the normal documents that you would think of, the documents that you really need to be looking at, including those resumes of the key people. It's more detailed than that, but I'm trying to give you a quick answer. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, it seems that we have a follow-up to that one. Someone asked, is there a set of standard documents that one should get from a manager, investment advisor, potential business partner? Is there a set of documents that one should get to start the review process?
No, there's not a standard list. That's another thing, is you can't use off-the-shelf software. You can't use a standard list that you find on a business website. Each situation requires customization. We don't use standard anything. We use customization. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, depending on what the situation is, really determines what the document list should be. I can't even answer that because it all depends on the situation. It has to be each situation requires a customized approach, and that includes a customized list of documents to ask for. But I would say that one of the key documents that I keep harping about is making sure that every single person who is on the board or who is an executive in that company, making sure you get their CVs and their resumes, because ripping those apart is going to tell you a lot. So it's all customized.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question here. Our company did not do background checks on new hires until recently. What should we do about current employees who didn't go through the background checks but have exhibited questionable behavior? And we could extend this out to executives and board members who may have not gone through the background checks that you are advocating. And how can
every single person that has not gone through that process needs to go through it, and that means that you're going to have to talk to your counsel about having them sign documents so that you can pull the critical documents. And what are the critical documents when you're doing background? Well, you want to do a federal criminal check. Anything less than a federal criminal check is a waste of time, because if you only check the state you're in and they lived for 90 days in Nevada and committed a crime out there, you would know about it. So you need to do a federal criminal check. Number two is you need their credit history, because a credit history is going to tell you an awful lot about their behavior and about their personal life. Ripping apart a credit history, I can do a whole complete psychological profile on them. In fact, I teach this to detectives and federal agents, how to use credit histories to write psych profiles. The third thing you want is their driver's record, because the driver's record is going to tell you things like this. If someone has 2 moving violations within a 16-month period of time, they have anger issues. They have a lot of anger issues. And frankly, you have to ask yourself whether you want them working for you or not. By the way, those 3 documents I just mentioned, which is driver's record, credit history, and the federal criminal records check, has been used for 40 years by the life insurance industry. That's how all of our premiums are determined. They write a personality profile based on those 3 documents. So if it's good enough for life insurance people, it's good enough for everyone else. And frankly, that concerns me that your company is kind of going backwards in doing this, but you need to move on this right away, because everyone who hasn't had a proper background check is a liability bomb waiting to happen until you determine that they are quality people. So you need to jump on this pretty quickly. This needs to be done ASAP. So, but as far as them signing documents to allow you to look at those personal documents, you're going to have to talk to counsel about that as to what the federal law says and what your state law says.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. We now have a question that pertains to Bernie Madoff. During the presentation of content, you talked about how there were some things that happened in his background that were predictive of what he was going to do in the future. How would you suggest that one talks about that with a investment advisor, business partner, someone who you trust with money? If you see things in their past that are questionable at best, how do you approach them and how do you have that conversation?
Are you talking about someone that is already handling your money?
Yeah, it could be. The question was not specific on that, but
okay,
it could be, or it could be someone that you are in the process of doing a deal with.
Well, if there's an old saying in the intelligence community, if there's a doubt, there is no doubt. And I will tell you that if you start having concerns in the initial meet and greet, hi, how are you, want to get to know you before you handle my money, you need to leave. There's no question to ask at that point. If you have doubts, if something comes up that is a red flag in your brain, especially those of you who are listening to this webinar are professional people. You have a trained intuition. So if a red flag comes up, it's time to go. Find somebody else. There's no. I have an attorney who I work with up in New England, and she was approached by 2 people about investing money into a scientific company. And every time we tried to get information from them for the due diligence process, they kept him-hawing around and making excuses. And I said to her, I said, listen, you need to leave. I said, you need to leave. These guys are con artists. They shouldn't be having a problem with this. They're claiming federal security clearances. And I said, I have one. And I said, what they're talking about is nonsense. I said, if they won't give up this information and you're going to put a significant amount of money in, it's time to leave. And she kept saying, well, but it's a great deal. I said, listen, you got to ignore the deal, and you got to think. You're a smart person. You're well-trained. You're highly educated. You need to leave. Forget the deal. There are other deals coming down the road. And this drug out and cost her a lot of money and a lot of time because she wouldn't let go. She was just focused on the deal. And it was a good deal. But the problem was that there were too many variables and too many red flags, and we advised her, you need to leave. And that bothered her because she was the type of go-getter who always was successful, always reached the goal. I said, listen, this isn't a track meet or a tennis match. You need to leave. I said, before you get sucked up into something. And eventually she listened, but after a painful lesson in financial hurt, because at some point I said, look, I said, you pay us to advise you. We're trying to do this due diligence. What we found so far is just nothing but a sea of red flags. So that's our advice. You need to leave and find a better deal. And so again, if a red flag comes up, run away. Now, if you're already in an existing relationship with someone, I know this is going to sound paranoid, but it's not. Pull your money and leave. And if they say why, who cares why? I'm leaving. I'm just not going to invest anymore, or I don't want to be a part of this anymore. We've had a lot of clients who we've told them, your options are really simple. Stay in and risk losing everything or leave. The problem we have as human beings is we don't like to be rude. Mommy and Daddy told us that we had to be nice to people. Well, that's fine when you're a child, but as an adult, there are times when you need to be rude, when you need to say, you know what, I've had enough, I'm leaving. And so I would say that if a red flag comes up and you're a professional who has experience and your intuition, which is well-trained, is saying there's something wrong, I wouldn't spend a lot of time investigating it. I would leave. I would just walk away. That's the safe response. So.
Okay, great. And we have a question here now for someone who I guess has an interest in the individual investor or an individual in the general public who asks, when hiring a financial advisor or someone who is handling your money, should they be prepared for you to ask them to go through a standard background check, and should you take the time and the money to put that person through a standard background check?
Well, the answer to that is very simple. Considering what's been happening over the last couple of years, if a financial advisor will not allow you to do a proper due diligence assessment, which is, when we do them, it's usually less than 5 days. It's very simple to do. If they're not willing to let you do that, then you know what? Find another advisor. That's going to tell you a lot. If someone is very closed off to any kind of investigation into who they are, if they get defensive in any way, you know what? Move on. Find someone else. What did Shakespeare say? I think you protested too much. And so they should be prepared. And certainly, what we're investigating a lot of financial advisors and stockbrokers, and they say, I can't believe I have to go through all this. And I said, well, thank Bernie for that. People have to be checked out now. And we talk to them, and we're diplomatic with them, and they understand. They don't like it, but they don't have to like it. Now, some just refuse. They will not go through it, and we know right away that they're con artists because they would be willing to be investigated if they were for real. So a lot of times, just asking for the investigation will tell you whether they're quality people or not. So.
And Dale, to follow up on that, if they work for a larger corporation, for instance, like if they're not, Joe Smith Advisor LLC, then you would have to go through probably the corporate entity to get that done. What if there's pushback from the larger corporate entity on doing a background check on an individual advisor?
Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Why would, if you're hitting your head against the brick wall, don't do that anymore. I mean, it's like the old joke, Doc, it hurts every time I do this, and the doctor says, don't do that anymore. Why try to come up with some kind of a creative plan if you hit a wall and people don't want to do business with you? It's your money. They need you more than you need them. Without you, they cannot make money. And so they're there to provide a service. And the bottom line is be cordial, be polite, be professional, but if they're going to do pushback says something to hide or ego, and you don't want them handling your money. And my advice to everybody is just buy Disney stock. That's what I do. You'll be fine.
There are a lot of copycats, as you said, a lot of copycats or Ponzi schemes that have happened since Bernie Madoff, and there are probably some that remain undiscovered. As a criminal analyst, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with people who are trying to take advantage of others? Are there emerging trends that you've identified that you think will continue into the future that investors and business men and women should be aware of?
Well, it is funny you talk about that because that's not discussed a lot. There has been an extraordinary amount of copycats in the last year. People who have basically watched the Ponzi schemes and the investor fraud and said, well, I know how they got caught, and I'm smarter than they are, so I can figure out a way to do it and do it better. And so you have this phase 2 and phase 3 of investor fraud that's happening now. In fact, most people don't realize this, and all of you who are listening should know this, that the U.S. Secret Service for a long time now is in charge of investigating credit card and check fraud. And so in every major area of the country, there are these task forces that they head. In fact, we work with the task force in Philadelphia and Chicago, And the thing is that as we talked to Secret Service agents, they said, yeah, wave 2 and wave 3 are coming. They all realize that, and we see it. And you can see it on the internet too, where people are saying, we know that you want to invest money, but you're scared to, and we're going to show you all of our information. We have an open book concept. They basically suck people in by saying, well, we've done our own due diligence, and you don't have to worry about us. You have to worry about everybody. Just because you have another issue too. Sometimes people aren't committing fraud that are stockbrokers or investment advisors. Sometimes they're incompetent. And a lot of times when we're doing our due diligence process, we find that they're incompetent and that they really are no good at what they do. And they may be good people. They certainly haven't committed a crime, but we go back to our client and say, listen, here's the evidence. They're incompetent. They're not good at what they do. So keep your money. Don't give it to them. So incompetency is a whole other side of that. But yes, in answer to your question, there are a lot of copycats who think they can do it better. They think they're smarter, and eventually they're going to get caught. But I don't want to see people. I've interviewed and spent time with people who have been victims of Bernie Madoff, and these are just horrendously sad stories. These are people that could be my mother or my father or my grandmother or my grandfather who have just lost their whole life savings, things they've worked 60 years for. And when you talk to them, I say to them, well, who was watching the door for you? Who was the gatekeeper? And they just go, nobody was watching out for me. I really wasn't being watched out for. And people are quick to criticize and say, well, they got caught up in the cult of Bernie and all that. And I understand that. But at some point, the professionals who are around these people should have been doing their job. It's interesting, Matt, you and I have talked about this. One of the calls that we're getting pretty much on a weekly basis now is from bank regulation officers, bank compliance officers who are saying, look, we did due diligence on, we're going to give out this loan for, $5 million, and we've done all we can do the rest. That's usually how they put it. Take it the rest of the way, because we want to make sure we don't get screwed. So, again, as I said in that answer to the earlier question, you do the forensic evaluation of the money, forensic evaluation of the legal part, and then, well, what's left is the people. How are you going to assess the quality of the people for competency, illegal behavior, whatever? So.
Okay, great. It looks like we have one more question here, and Bernie Madoff was, while doing this Ponzi scheme, he was involved in a lot of local New York City charities as well as national charities. Yep. And people who have these tendencies may be asked by friends and colleagues to join boards of nonprofits where they'll be able to extend their reach even further. How should a nonprofit who may not have the resources and or the experience with doing due diligence, the task due diligence, or how can that concept be introduced to nonprofit boards and nonprofit leaders?
We have several organizations that are nonprofits that we do work for, and one of the things that I told them when we first met with them was, right now when you look at embezzlement, currently about 40% of all embezzlement is done in nonprofit organizations. So the question is, well, what can you afford to do and what can't you afford not to do? You're going to have to do the background. I mean, it's not expensive to have due diligence done. It's not an expensive proposition, contrary to popular opinion, and it has to be done. I mean, there's no other answer to the question. You've got the reputation of your organization. Your organization is helping out someone. So if it goes down, it's affecting a large number of people, and thirdly, you have a responsibility under federal law to manage that money correctly. I mean, you're operating under an IRS tax code, and so what can you afford not to do? You're going to have to do that. You have to be very careful about people on your board, people who are working in your organization, and this kind of casualness that goes on is a problem. If you remember, back in 1990, there was a man in Villanova, Pennsylvania, who was a financial guy, and he started reaching out to nonprofits and saying how he was going to be able to take their money and give them, I think it was quadruple the money, the return on investment for their money. And a lot of major organizations got caught up in this and sucked into this. And, you know, it ruined their reputations. It ruined their ability to raise money. It ruined many of these organizations just went belly up, which affected the lives of literally thousands of people. And I actually knew this guy. So he had not directly, but I knew him because he was in the same circles that I was walking, and I just could tell from listening to him that he was a con artist. So when all of this happened, and this was going on back at the beginning of my career, even as a neophyte criminal analyst, I could tell that this guy was a con artist, and people were buying it. And when it all came out, it didn't surprise me one bit. But in answer to your question, you can't afford not to. You can't. Now, with our nonprofits, what we do a lot of times is we have a training program where we teach a seminar on how to do proper due diligence like we do. And we teach it to a small group of people within an organization or a nonprofit, and that way they can save money over having us do it. But you have to do the process, and you have to ask, well, how good, like the question that's up there on the slide now, how can we improve our due diligence process? Well, that's pretty much by training or getting better quality people to do it. So you're going to have to do it, especially boards of directors. That's such a critical position to not do a background check, you know?
Oh, definitely. Well, I don't see any more questions in the queue. So, Dale, do you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to make?
I would just say this. All of us in this call are professionals at what we do. And as professionals, we have a duty and a responsibility to take care of our clients. And, you know, I teach business ethics at Drexel Business School and down at Howard, and I run my company the way I teach, which is that it's got to be legal and it's got to be ethical. And to do that, to be legal and ethical, you've got to have your personal life in order, and that's what we're looking at. That's the key to due diligence, is looking at the people who are involved in the business, involved in the organization that money is being put into or being purchased, and finding out their credibility. And if they're not credible people, if they're operating their personal lives in an unethical fashion, then chances are very good that the business has got a problem, or they're embezzling or doing something else that's nefarious. And as professionals, we have to really remember that. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we have to remember that we have an ethical responsibility above and beyond the law to protect our clients. I mean, that's what we do at the end of the day. You know, there's nothing wrong with making widgets, but there's a satisfaction in protecting people. I know I get it, and I know a lot of you do. There's a satisfaction in being the protector, and that's really what we're all about. So what's the process that we have to do to protect people? I mean, that's really the question that needs an answer. So thank you all for joining us today.
Okay, Dale, thank you again. Thank you for putting the time into the presentation. I thought that you could really see that you did think about this for a while and put a great presentation together. So I do thank you. I would also like to thank all who attended today. I know each of you have a very busy schedule, and thank you for taking an hour out of that to spend with us. If you'd like to speak to Dale about a case or a project that you have or that you will be working on, you can contact here at TASA. Our telephone number is 1-800-523-2319. I will be sending out a link to the archived recording of this webinar tomorrow morning. The archived recording of this webinar, along with all of our archived recordings, are placed in the Knowledge Center at TASA's website. I encourage you to visit it and explore. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, we do take everyone's comments down and try to improve our presentations based on your comments. Please feel free to email me at mhyde@tasanet.com. And finally, we hope that you'll join us for future TASA events. We have 3 more webinars in the month of October. Please look in your inbox for the invitation to those. And if you have any webinars webinar topics that you'd like to see covered, please email me with them, and we'll do our best to get the presentation afloat. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to seeing you at future events.
Thank you all.